Good evening. Welcome to Crawley Borough Council's Planning Committee meeting of the 12th of January 2020. My name is Jonathan Purdy and I chair the committee. The agenda for this evening has been published and is available on the council website. The committee will be considering 5 planning applications this evening, and I propose to deal with those applications in the order shown on the agenda. As I'm sure people watching are aware, there are unfortunately no in-person public speaking rights at this virtual planning committee. However, members of the public and ward councillors wishing to make representations on the applications have been given the opportunity to submit written statements in advance of the meeting. Any statements will be read to the committee by the Democratic Services Officer. Can I please ask the officers supporting this meeting to introduce themselves, giving their name and job title? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Ms Matthews, Democratic Services Officer.
Heather Girling, Democratic Services Officer.
Linda, if you could please introduce yourself.
Linda Saunders, Planning Solicitor.
Jean McPherson, I'm the Group Manager for Development Management.
Hamish Walk, Principal Planning Officer.
Thank you very much. Before I invite the members of the committee to confirm their attendance, can I please ask that their mobile phones are switched off or on silent, their backgrounds are plain or nondescript, and they will not be disturbed during the meeting. As I'm sure all members are aware, but I will remind you again, committee members are reminded that they should have their microphones turned off unless speaking, and their cameras turned off unless speaking or requesting to speak. When asked to speak, please turn your camera on, unmute yourself and pause for 3 seconds to allow for the slight delay in communication. You should see your name and your face with a little red border around it in the corner of your screen. With that in mind, committee members are also asked to be aware of who they will be following in the voting process and prepare accordingly. We have received apologies for absence from Councillor Raj Sharma. Do we have any other apologies for absence, please?
We have no further apologies, Chair.
Thank you. We will now be taking introductions together with items 2, 3 and 4. Can I please ask committee members when called upon to confirm the ward that they represent, whether they have any declarations of interest to make, whether they have any lobbying declarations to make, if they agree with the minutes of the planning meeting committee held on 7th of December 2020, and if they have visited the site of any of the applications. Would the Democratic Services Officer please call the roll?
Councillor Ashcroft.
Councillor Liam Ascoff for Gossip's Green and North East Broadfield. I have no declarations. I have no interest, lobbying interest to declare. I didn't visit the site, and I agree the minutes of the last meeting.
Councillor Belbin.
Good evening, Councillor Andrew Belbin representing Pound Hill South and Worth. I have no declarations of interest to make. I have been lobbied on item 7. For transparency, I should state that I've been lobbied by my wife, Councillor Tina Belbin, who represents that ward, Pound Hill South and North, where the agenda item is located. I agree the minutes of the 7th of December 2020. and I would just like to state I'm very familiar with the sites of items 6, 7, 8 and 9 on the agenda, so I have not felt the need to visit these sites given the current restrictions. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Irvine, could you please turn your camera on?
Okay, Councillor Ian Irvine, representing Broadfield Ward. I need to ask the Solicitor Chair about declaring interest in something, and that is that I'm a member of the Crawley, the Cycling and Walking Forum, which is one of the consultees. Although since I've been appointed to that, I haven't been invited to any meetings, haven't attended any meetings. I've not taken any part in the responses to the council. I have no idea who does make the responses. So therefore, do I need to declare an interest?
Can you just turn your microphone on?
Sorry, if I could give advice, Chair, please, to the councillor. Can you hear me?
Yes, certainly. Please do give that advice.
Yes.
Thank you.
I would advise that you declare a personal interest in this matter, as your interest at the moment is not significant.
Okay, in that case, I declare a personal interest in items 5, 6 and 7 as a member of the Cycling and Walking Forum. I have no lobbying to declare. I agree with the minutes of the previous meeting, and I haven't undertaken any site visits.
Councillor Jaggard.
Good evening, I'm Councillor Jaggard from Maidenbough. I have no declarations of interest and I have not been lobbied. I agree the minutes of the last meeting. I did have a site visit drive-by on item 6 and 7, and I took a walk around Milton Mount Lake for item 8 and 9. Thank you.
Councillor Magali. Just unmute yourself, please. Sorry, Councillor Magali, you're currently muted.
Oops. Sorry. Right, I'll start again. Maureen Magali representing Tailgate. I've got no declarations to make. I have not lobbied and I've not visited any of the sites. And I agree the minutes of the last meeting. Thank you.
Councillor Purdy.
Good evening again. Jonathan Purdy, representing Three Bridges. I have one declaration of interest to make. I am employed by one of the parties invited to respond to the consultation on item 5. This particular party did not respond to the consultation. I have not been lobbied on any of the items. I agree with the minutes of the planning committee held on the 7th of December 2020, and I have visited the sites for items 6 and 7. Thank you.
Councillor Rana, could you please turn your camera on? Thank you, Councillor Rana.
Good evening. I am Councillor Tahira Rana and I represent Broadfield. I do not have an interest to declare. I have not been lobbied on any items. I have not visited the site and I agree on the minutes held on the, I think was it 6th of December? Well, whatever, in December anyway. Thank you.
Councillor Peter Smith.
Good evening. I'm Peter Smith, representing Ifield and Ifield West. I have not been lobbied on any of the applications. I'm a member of the Crawley Cycling and Walking Forum, but I've not previously declared an interest. But based on the advice that Councillor Irvine has received, I'll declare a personal non-prejudicial interest on applications 5, 6 and 7. I haven't taken any involvement in the forum's response to those applications. I have visited application sites 6 and 7, and I agreed the minutes of the 7th of December Planning Committee meeting.
Thank you. For record purposes, we have councillors Burrett, Bob Burgess, Brenda Burgess. They're present in the meeting, but they have no speaking rights.
Thank you very much. We will now move on to the planning applications, beginning with agenda item 5, application number CR 2020-0575 NCC. Hilton Hotel, South Terminal, London Gatwick Airport, Westway, Pound Hill, Crawley. Would the planning officer please introduce the matter after? No, would the planning officer please introduce the matter? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully you can all hear me okay. Okay, let me introduce the application. Before I start, I think it would be worth drawing members' attention to an additional condition that will form part of the recommendation. I'll highlight this again at the end, but I thought it'd be helpful to see it from the start. So the additional condition should be visible on your screen. It covers the roof of the proposed car park. It would appear from the plans, and I'll come on to illustrate this, that there may be possible to create vehicular access to the roof, and it is a concrete roof. So for the reasons you can see there, partly to do with aviation safety and partly due to with control of parking in relation to Gatwick, we're recommending an additional condition that the roof of the car park shall not be used for parking vehicles without the permission of the local planning authority. So if that were to be proposed in the future, the applicant could come back to us if the scheme is approved. So let me run through the scheme. This is a revision to a previously approved application, which members may recall. You can see the application site outlined in red here, and just for clarification, north is off to the right hand side of this screen. You can see the north arrow just here. So you have the Hilton Hotel in this space here. Over to the west, you've got the Gatwick multi-storey car park, and then the main the South Terminal building is further to the west. So to the north of the hotel, you've got this site here. There is an existing road and parking area along this part of the site. Quite a lot of the site is currently vegetated. And the proposal is to put a multi-storey car park on the site. As I said, there has been a previous approval for a multi-storey car park on the site, so this is an amendment to the previously approved scheme. The amendments are, I guess, relatively minor, but I can run through them for you. Let me just zoom in slightly because one of them is easiest to see on this plan. So you can see some yellow lines here. There is a gas main that will run around the building here, and obviously, as with gas mains, there is a need to keep the building a certain distance from that. There are some redundant gas mains to be removed, but the building has been moved slightly. I think it's about 1.5 meters away from that the gas main running along that part of the building. So this part of the building has been pulled back slightly. We'll move on to the floor plans. So you've got a fairly standard parking layout. You've got access coming in from the road that runs to the east of the hotel. It is now a split level car park. I think the previous scheme was just had single floors, but you've now got ramps centrally. So you will come in at the lower point, which they call level 0. You've got one ramp to level 0.5, and then another ramp to level 1, and so on up the building. You can see here the disabled parking space on the ground spaces on the ground floor. and we have motorcycle and cycle parking over in this area to the side of the building. Then there's some additional parking along the road to the south of the building between the proposed car park and the hotel building. In terms of total number of spaces, there has been a drop from the previously approved 831 spaces within the building, down to 811 spaces now being proposed. So that's the next floor up. You can see you come up from level 0.5 onto level 1 here, and then round again onto 1.5 and so on up the building. I won't run through all the floors, but I will show you the top 2 floors of parking. And again, it's the same layout. What we have though is a sign here that says, on the plan, says removable barrier for roof access only. You can zoom in on that. That really is what triggered the concern and the additional condition about the roof. I would assume that that barrier can be removed to provide access to the roof, which may simply be for maintenance purposes. But I think if you can get a vehicle up there, then clearly you could also, in theory, park. And so the additional condition would address that possibility. Hang on. That's the wrong button there. So this next plan, this is the proposed roof structure. So it is a concrete roof that's proposed with drainage channels running across it. The reason the applicants have given for that is to protect cars and users of the car park who are on the 5th floor. So I think there's a perfectly reasonable justification for the roof, and that is part of the amendment. So the previously approved scheme did not have a roof, and the top floor was open. Turning now to the proposed elevations, you can see, I'll zoom in on them individually, but you can see on the right hand side the colours that are proposed. So it's a blue colour. Previously the elevations were primarily grey, and there is still some grey on the underlying structure, but you can see there's a kind of graded blue colour, darker blue on the lower floors, fading away to a lighter blue on the upper floors, which is a fairly typical kind of visual device to lighten where you need to address the bulk and massing of a particularly large building. It helps to lighten the upper floors and reduce their perceived bulk. I'll just scroll down so you can see similar colours in the other elevations. And if I just scroll over to the right, you can see in more detail the proposed colours as they get lighter towards the top of the building. So that's another change from the previous approval, is the change from grey to blue colour. You can see here the proposed section, so you can see the splits in levels, and in this area in the centre you would have the ramps that run backwards and forwards to get from level to level. And then finally, in terms of plans, this is the tree protection plan. This is, I think, unchanged actually from the previous permission. So you can see there are some trees that will be removed, which are the ones marked in red. So their loss has previously been agreed. There will be existing retained trees to the right-hand side of the site. And some new tree planting. You can see that's the symbol for the new tree planting. So you can see a number of new trees being placed within that. You'll also have seen from the report that there is a tree contribution of 44,100, which covers the loss of trees within the site. That will be used for off-site tree provision. That contribution has already been paid, and as I'll come on to in the recommendation, a deed of variation would be required just to tie this current application into the previous permission. I thought it was probably worth showing you at least the previous elevations, just so you can see the change in colour. So you can see they are grey. Again, it took the graded approach where you had darker colours at the bottom, fading away to a lighter grey at the top, but is clearly different in that it's switched from blue to grey. Sorry, I should have shown you photos of the site as well. So these are some photos showing the site. You've got on the left-hand side here, you can see, I think that's an office building that connected to the hotel. So this is looking west across the bottom half and the road that I mentioned running across the site at present. And then the other two views are taken from the eastern road running up the side of the site. So the application site is on the other side of the road, and you can see the trees, and then the northern ring road around the airport is just to the top there. The left-hand photo here is taken from the southern part of the site looking northwards, again onto the trees. And you can see some of the existing surface parking along the roads to the south and the west of the site. So in terms of the application, the parking provision, as you've seen from the report, meets the hotel parking standard for cars. There's a slight shortfall in motorcycle parking, which the applicants have justified on the basis that not a lot of people do arrive at the site or at the hotel on motorbikes. Just to clarify, there is a slight error in paragraph 5.5 of the report, which incorrectly says that the provision of motorcycle parking. So I'm just trying to find the page myself. It refers to the provision being at 1 space per 8.5 car parking spaces. In fact, the provision being proposed is 1 space per 11.75 car parking spaces. So that is slightly below the motorcycle standard of 1 space per 10 spaces. The maths is a bit complicated there, but it is slightly below, but we don't think significantly below the standard. Cycle parking is also considered to be acceptable. Again, a limited number of people cycle to this location, although I think it's probably more likely to be the staff of the hotel who would cycle. So the highways impacts are set out in the report, but they are considered acceptable and in fact are very similar to those of the previously approved scheme. The design, height and appearance changes are relatively minor, mainly relating to colour, the roof on the building and a slight change to the height, but they are all considered acceptable. Landscaping is as previously approved as part of the Reserve Matters application. We've had no objection from Gatwick Airport Safeguarding or from NATS to the scheme, although I have spoken to GAL this afternoon. They are supportive of the proposed additional condition on use of the roof of the car park, just so that any height issue can be addressed if it was used for parking of vehicles. So the recommendation is for approval subject to the completion of a deed of variation to carry forward the tree contribution that was previously agreed and has in fact been paid, subject to the conditions set out into the report and to the additional condition that I mentioned at the start of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Walk. As I'm sure everybody is aware, but nevertheless for the benefit of people who may be watching for the first time, the process for consideration of applications at this meeting will be as follows. Any committee member wishing to speak should turn on their camera. This will signify to the Democratic Services Officer coordinating the meeting your request to speak. You will then be invited to speak one by one. When you're called to speak, please unmute your microphone. Check that your screen is surrounded by a red box before speaking. Please turn your camera and microphone off when you are finished and no longer live. Once all committee members that wish to speak have done so, the planning officer will respond to any queries. We will now begin consideration of the application. Please turn on your camera if you wish to speak. Yeah. Just before we invite the first person to speak, I wish to confirm that we have received no statements from members of the public on this item. Thank you.
Councillor Jaggard.
Thank you. I like the blue shading. That I can remember this application from before, and the blue shading I think is actually really nice. I just want to clarify something about the distance. You mentioned that it was now a metre away from the gas pipe that is there. Are you saying that that's a metre smaller, which is why we've lost the 20 spaces? And can I just confirm it hasn't got closer to the hotel? I was just a bit concerned. I can't remember whether there were windows in that sort of northish facing side of the hotel, and I would be concerned of the distance between those windows and the car park if the space has been reduced. So can you just confirm the amount of space between the window and the building? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just before I invite the planning officer to answer that point, can I just ask for clarification? Your proposed condition for parking on the roof, is that being added to the report, or is that for the committee to consider adding to the report? Thank you.
Sorry, do you want me to come back on those points now, or are there any other questions?
I didn't see anybody else with any other questions, which is why we've come back to you, Mr. Moore.
Okay, that's fine. Sorry, I'm just trying to read through the report. The report in paragraph 2.2 does address the issue of how far the building has moved. It has moved 0.74 meters, 74 centimeters closer to the hotel. So it is slightly closer, but I think it's a fairly marginal reduction. I'm afraid I don't know whether there are windows in that elevation of the hotel that were affected. But I think the distance, 10 to 10.74 meters, I think would probably be okay for a hotel relationship if it doesn't sound significantly different from what was previously approved. Yeah, so the building itself has moved 0.74 meters to the south, which is, as I said, to get away from the gas main. So that does affect both ends of the building, but I think the revisions to the shape of the building have also led to the reduction of about the loss of about 20 parking spaces from what was previously approved. In terms of the additional condition, that is an additional condition recommended by officers. Obviously, committee have the decision to take on whether to agree the recommendation and add or accept all the conditions or amend them. So we officers would recommend that condition is attached, but it obviously is part of the committee's decision whether they wish to do so or not.
Thank you very much. Does anybody else wish to speak on this matter? My proposal will be that we move with the additional condition unless there are any objections from the members of the committee. I can't see any cameras coming on, so all members of the committee having had the opportunity to speak, we will move on to the vote. A recorded vote on the application will be taken by the Democratic Services Officer on my behalf. Members of the committee will be called upon to vote in alphabetical order. Once you're live, please unmute yourself, ensure your camera is on, and state whether you are for or against the recommendation, or if you abstain. The recommendation is to permit. I move the recommendation as chairman of the committee, but I do so simply so that we may bring it to a vote, not necessarily signifying that I support the recommendation. As the vice chair is absent, can I ask a member of the committee to please second by switching on their camera? Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I second the motion.
Thank you very much. Will the Democratic Service Officer please conduct the recorded vote?
Okay, so this is a recorded vote being taken on agenda item 5. Committee members are asked to vote for or against the recommendation before them, or by way of an abstention. Please ensure your video feed is live before declaring your vote. Councillor Ashcroft.
4.
Councillor Belden.
4.
Councillor Irvine.
4.
Councillor Jaggard.
4.
Councillor Mughali.
4.
Councillor Purdy.
4.
Councillor Rana, could you please turn your camera on?
Uh, 4.
And Councillor Smith.
4.
Thank you, Chair. So the vote has been taken with 8 votes for, 0 votes against and 0 abstentions on the recommendation.
Thank you. Application number CR 2020-0575 NCC, Hilton Hotel, South Terminal, London Gatwick Airport, Westway, Pound Hill, Crawley, has been permitted, subject to the completion of the deed of variation to the Section 106 agreement, the conditions set out in the report, including the additional condition on parking in the roof, and the informatives set out in report PES 358A. That moves us on to agenda item 6, application number CR 2020-0589 outline. Car park, Station Way, Northgate, Crawley. Can I please ask the planning officer to introduce the item and take us through it? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I have a couple of updates on this application as well, and an additional reason for refusal, which you can see on your screen now, which I shall cover before the main presentation. So there have been 2 additional comments received. One is from Environmental Health with regard to air quality. The comments express some concern about dust management during construction, but state that that could be addressed by condition as part of a construction management plan if the scheme, obviously if the scheme had been recommended for approval. And then moving on to the development itself and to future occupancy, no objection is raised on air quality grounds, but the air quality management officer does have concerns about the potential quality of life of future residents, particularly in relation to idling traffic on queuing on Station Way at the traffic lights and caused by the level crossing. So she recommends in her comments that consideration be given to moving the building further away from the road and putting the residential uses on upper floors. Obviously neither of those are part of the current application. That said, the applicant has produced air quality an air quality assessment, and the air quality management officer is not objecting to the contents of that report and doesn't feel that refusal on this basis is warranted, I think what would have happened is that we would have gone back to the applicants to try and address those issues had the scheme not been recommended for refusal for the reasons that it has. The second comments I've received since the report was published are from the council's heritage consultant. She objects to the proposal on the grounds of the impact on views of and the setting of views into and the setting of the Brighton Road conservation area, the grade 2 listed signal box adjacent to the level crossing, and to the locally listed Nightingale House, which is south of the signal box. So in view of those comments, we are recommending, officers are recommending an additional reason for refusal to add to the ones that are set out in the report. And that is set out on your screen now and covers the impact on those 3 different heritage assets: the conservation area, the listed building and the locally listed building. So in terms of the proposal itself, this is the application site outlined in red. Hopefully you can see that clearly enough. So you have Station Way running east-west across the front of across the north of the site, and then you've got the railway line with Crawley Station off to the right hand side of the plan in front of you. You can see the surface car park to the east of the site. Historically, the car park has been used in connection with Taj Restaurant, which is to the west on the opposite side of the High Street. And the conservation area lies to the south, Brighton Road conservation area down here. The signal box is shown by the letters SB there, and Nightingale House is the building marked 1 to 3 there. So that hopefully sets the context for you. As you will all be aware, there is a level crossing over the railway here, and there are traffic lights around this traffic island in part which control traffic turning left to utilise the level crossing. So this is the proposed site plan. So you can see the application site outlined in red. The grey area here is the proposed building, and you can see a vehicle parked within what would be a proposed lay-by to the side of Station Way here. You'll also note that there is an area to the south marked proposed landscape area that is not part of the application site. It's not in the applicant's control, it's Network Rail owned land. And the landscaped area that proposed forms part of the current application, Reserve Matters application for the Station Gateway development. You can also see on the right hand side the location of one of the proposed residential buildings forming part of that proposal. That scheme, as you'll be aware, has outline planning permission, and we have a current Reserve Matters application which officers are dealing with. So as I said, that site here, which is shown as a landscaped and garden area, is not in any way related to the proposed development. So let me run through the floor plans now. You can see here the proposed ground floor plan. So you can see the loading bay, which I showed you on the site plan earlier. And above that, obviously, you can see the left-hand lane for traffic turning round to go down Brighton Road over the level crossing. So the bay would be just to the side of that lane. In terms of the ground floor, this is a mixed use scheme for 15 flats and some commercial space. So in blue here, you can see 2 commercial units shown with a total floor area of about 93 or 94 square metres. They are shown divided into 2, with one illustrated as a coffee shop and one as a commercial unit, and with a commercially related bin store in this location here. In the eastern part of the building, and as you go up, you see on the yellow colour on the floor plans is where proposed residential accommodation is. So the scheme has a communal lobby with an entrance here, a bike store within that communal lobby, and then you come through to the staircase to the upper floors. You've got a communal plant room here and the residential bin store here. You'll also see there are 2 flats proposed on the ground floor. So there's a 1-bedroom flat here, which has windows to the north and the south of the building. So you've got a living room area looking out to the north here onto the pavement and a bedroom, and then the entrance hall and the kitchen area looking out to the south. You have another residential unit proposed on this side, with the bedroom looking out onto the pavement, a shower room and the living area looking out in that direction too, but also with a kitchen window to the south. Both these units have small outdoor spaces, 5 square metres, that are in this case south facing. So moving up to the next floor, you can see this is 4 residential units. 2 of them have north and south facing windows, as you'll see this end and that end. The middle 2, because of the communal staircase area, only have north facing windows. All 4 flats have some amenity space, which is in the form of a recessed balcony. Move on to the next 3 floors. So the layout is similar for these. So the second floor, I think, is probably identical to the floor below. You've got the 2 flats at the either end that have the north and south facing windows, and the single aspect north facing flats in the middle. The building drops down in height towards the level crossing, so you'll see the floor plan gradually gets smaller on the upper floors. So here on the 3rd floor you only have 3 flats, and then by the 4th floor you've dropped down to 2 flats. We have some, I think it's 2 2-bedroom flats, which are this one on the top floor and then the one below it at the western end of the 3rd floor. Show you the elevations. That's a bit clearer. So that's the proposed elevation to, it says High Street, it's actually the Station Way elevation, so it's the north facing elevation. You can see the recessed balcony areas here. Some of the flats on the ends have effectively roof terraces. You can see the way the windows are light. So that would be the main entrance to the flats. You've got the bin stores and plant room doors to either side, and you've got residential windows here and here. And then at this end of the building on the ground floor you've got the commercial units, and then you can see the windows run up through the building to serve the other flats. And this is the south facing elevation, so this would be facing the railway. You can see the 2 recessed amenity space areas at ground floor for the 2 ground floor units, and some amenity areas to the eastern end of the building. And you can see obviously the drop down in height down towards the level crossing. Here again you can see the north elevation, but you can see the elevation that would be seen from the level crossing. So you can see how this steps back from the level crossing, so you've got a flat roof over the commercial units and then some higher level roof terraces. You can perhaps see them better on the illustration on the bottom half of that drawing, and you can see how the balconies are recessed. I think actually the other elevation was, yeah, it's on the end of that drawing. So that's the east facing elevation, which would face towards the station gateway scheme. So that's a blank elevation, which would be visible as you come westwards along station gateway. So I'm getting my east and west mixed up. So as you were travelling westwards, you would see that east facing elevation. The top part of this drawing gives you some detail on the proposed materials. So you've got brick panelling, grey aluminium coated frames for the windows, and some rain screen cladding around some of the window detailing. And that's the illustrative scheme again. I'm sure you all know the site fairly well, but just to illustrate it by photo, so this is views taken from near the level crossing looking down towards the railway station, showing the surface parking area, and then the right hand view shows the view in the opposite direction. You can see the Taj restaurant, which the car park previously served, in the distance there. Here you can see the application site on the left. There is a row of bollards along the pavement at the moment. You can see the 3 lanes of traffic on Station Way. There is actually a cycle lane running along the middle of the road here as well. But the left-hand lane here then turns left down onto the level crossing, as you can see on the right-hand photo. That's a view from the other side of the road. You can see the application site here, and you can see the railway, and the conservation area is in this location over the level crossing. And that's a view pretty much from outside the Taj looking onto the site, looking eastwards. Then the final 2 photos show you the signal box and the view towards the site, which is just here across the level crossing. And again, you can see the railway pub on that plan there. So if I just go back to actually might be best to go to the ground floor plan. And I'll just run through our concerns about the application. So the application seeks outline permission, but detailed approval is sought at this stage for appearance, layout, scale and access. And actually paragraph 5.5 should include access and doesn't, but it is one of the issues for which detailed approval is currently sought. So as you can see, under the principle of proposed development within the report, there is no objection in principle to the proposed uses. But in paragraph 5.4, we set out concerns about basically the extent of the coverage of the site and the fact that it would form a very cramped form of development with excessive site coverage. And officers feel that does lead to a recommendation that the scheme is overdevelopment. That forms the first reason for refusal. Obviously, that is covered in part by the design issues and other issues that I'll come on to discuss. So the first reason for refusal is on the grounds of overdevelopment. The second reason is similar in some ways, but it relates to the design and detailing of the building. As you've seen from the plans, the building would almost entirely cover the application site. There's no opportunity for any landscaping within the site or any softening of the buildings. We don't consider that the elevations are of good quality. They're dominant, they're right on the back of the pavement, but they're actually fairly plain with little relief and no real good design quality to them. I think the proximity to the pavement for pedestrians will also create a kind of a fairly claustrophobic and overwhelming feel as you walk along, given the height of the proposed building, particularly at its eastern end. The windows don't appear to be recessed from the elevation, so there's very little relief to it. So the second reason for refusal does relate to the design and detailing of the building. I showed you the details of the different flats. There is a reasonable mix of unit sizes. They are 1 and 2 bedroom, but I think within this location and given the relatively limited size of the scheme, we would be happy with that, and they do all meet the internal space standards. The flats do all have outdoor amenity space, which just meets. I mean, they are 5 square metres. As you've seen with some of the balconies, the door opening out onto them would slightly reduce the usable space. But more importantly, officers are concerned that some of these are directly north facing and they are recessed, so they would certainly receive no direct sunlight. Some of them would probably receive relatively limited daylight as well. And so we are very concerned about the quality of some of those outdoor spaces, even though, as I said, they meet the minimum space standards. We are also concerned, particularly in terms of the ground floor units, about the proposed windows that look directly out onto the back of the pavement. For some of these rooms, the bedrooms in particular, these would be single aspect rooms, so their window is right on the back of the pavement. people in those rooms have no alternative outlook and clearly are susceptible to antisocial behaviour, and there is no defensible space or segregated space outside those windows, so we don't think that is an acceptable relationship. We also have concerns about lighting to some of those rooms, again because the north facing rooms will receive no direct sunlight and may well receive inadequate levels of natural light. So outlook from many of the flats would be poor, and some of them would be extremely poor, and amenity space too. So that forms the third reason for refusal in the report. The fourth reason relates to noise. Environmental Health are concerned that noise levels are particularly high, and whilst a noise report has been submitted, as you'll see in paragraphs 5.37 to 5.39, Environmental Health officers don't consider that to be the work to be satisfactory, and it relies quite heavily on survey work that was undertaken on the Taj building rather than on the application site. So refusal is recommended on noise grounds, particularly in relation, well, partly in relation to train noise, but I think also in relation to traffic along Station Way and the disturbance that could cause. The fifth reason for refusal relates to impact on adjoining developments. Might be worth just going back to the proposed site plan. So you can see the adjoining Station Gateway development. Now the proposed flats in this location, and this is only part of a reserve matters application, but they do have side windows. The side windows are secondary. They're within the same room as the north facing windows, which are here, but clearly they're in very close proximity to the building here, and I think the outlook would be affected. The blank elevation here would be quite dominant upon the windows in those flats. It would also be likely to block sunlight in the afternoon. So we don't think the impact on that development is acceptable. And clearly users of this proposed garden area to serve this development would also feel overlooked given the number of windows that would be in the south elevation and the fact they would directly overlook this proposed garden area. Just go back to the proposed ground floor layout. So the Highway Authority have objected to the scheme. They are particularly concerned about the loading bay. As you can see, a vehicle is shown here, but we don't have track drawings, tracking diagrams to show the size of the vehicle that could be accommodated and how successfully it could be accommodated. But as you can see here, even on this drawing, which shows a vehicle, I think, which is a kind of transit van size, it shows the communal bin store doors open, and quite simply there is no way a pedestrian could pass while those doors are open and whilst refuse is being collected. Even without those doors being open, the distance is inadequate to meet the minimum standards of the Highway Authority. So they aren't satisfied with the layout of the scheme here and have objected on that basis. Officers are also concerned, this would be Borough Council planning officers, are also concerned that whilst we might accept a low parking scheme in this location, we have done on other schemes, the proximity of the site, so I'm just trying to work out how to zoom back out again. I'm not quite sure how to do that, but maybe if I close it down and go back in. The proximity of the site to the level crossing, which you can see here, the single lane of traffic that comes around to utilise that level crossing, and the lack of any ability other than the loading bay for vehicles visiting this development to leave the highway. We are concerned that it's likely to result in some level of parking on the carriageway. It's difficult to quantify that, but we think it is likely to cause some inconvenience to users of the adjoining lane leading to the level crossing, potentially some conflict with the cycle lane that exists there, and just general disturbance to traffic movements. As members will be aware, once you reach this site, I mean, if you came along here hoping to use the loading bay and you couldn't, as the report sets out, once you've gone over the level crossing, it's about a 3 kilometre distance to go right round Southgate Drive, Southgate Avenue to get back along Station Way back to the site. So it's not a journey that you would undertake lightly. You'd be quite, I think the incentive would be there to try and find somewhere nearer to stop if you could. So we have concerns about that. And Network Rail, as is set out in the report, also object to the scheme in terms of it obstructing views of the level crossing and the railway safety concerns connected with that. And then reason for refusal 7 relates to refuse and recycling, partly in terms of the orientation of the proposed residential bin store and how those containers are laid out, but also in terms of pull distances, particularly if the refuse, partly to the loading bay, but if the loading bay was occupied at the time the refuse vehicle came along, then clearly there are considerable difficulties with that. And whilst there may be other laybys provided if the station gateway scheme to the east gets approval, they would be a much further distance away. So they are the first seven reasons for refusal set out in the report. You'll see reasons for refusal 8 and 9 refer to the lack of affordable housing with the scheme. It does not comply with policy H4 of the local plan, and there is also not an agreement to secure the appropriate tree planting and open space contributions. And then, as I said at the start of the presentation, there's now an additional reason for refusal recommended on heritage grounds. So I think that concludes the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Walk. There have been 3 statements submitted by members of the public and local councillors on this item. Would the Democratic Services Officer please read the statements?
Thank you, Chair. As you've mentioned, we have received 3 statements on this application. Statement 1 is from the planning agent. Good evening, Chair and members. First, it should be said that the applicant for this development feels aggrieved at the lack of engagement they have received from officers in the determination period of this application. It is the duty of the local planning authority to deal with applications and applicants in a positive and proactive manner. Yet this has not been the applicant's experience. Rather, the applicant feels that they have been given no reasonable opportunity to respond to the officer's assessment, despite multiple requests from their agent to do so. Similarly, certain key consultee feedback has been withheld from the applicant and their agent, only now presented in the officer's committee report. Ahead of discussions that were expected to take place with the officer, the applicant had prepared alterations to the scheme, which resolved issues relating to noise and highways impact raised in the consultee responses that had been shared via the application portal. However, the officer's subsequent lack of engagement prevented these changes from being considered. Resultantly, the reasons for refusal proposed by the officers are not justified. While there are clearly some fundamental points of disagreement as to the scheme's acceptability, such as affordable housing and parking provision, the necessary appraisals were submitted to justify the proposed development. As to parking, the officer has neglected to mention in their report the West Sussex Highways Authority, in their consultation response, explicitly endorsed a car-free development. The town centre location, with ready access to services and amenities and multiple modes of public transport, removes the need for car ownership by future occupiers. Therefore, to insist on a parking provision for a relatively small number of apartment units in a town centre location is not only contrary to sustainable development objectives, but also flies in the face of Crawley Borough Council's own declaration of the climate emergency in 2019. Contrary to suggestions by the officer, the proposed development has incorporated all reasonable comments that were provided in a pre-application feedback, demonstrating the applicant's willingness to cooperate in these matters and positively respond to recommendations for changes where possible. Therefore, it is asserted by the applicant that many of the objections regarding matters of the development's relationship to the surrounding area, impact on neighbouring developments, and other technical details could have been successfully addressed within the determination period. It is difficult to see how planning officers could suggest otherwise when they made no overtures to applicant or their agent to resolve these matters. Indeed, the whole point of the determination process is to discuss any and all areas where enhancements to particular aspects of a scheme will improve a development and ultimately secure a positive recommendation. Ultimately, the applicant put forward this proposed development in good faith, that it was making a positive contribution to the regeneration of Crawley Town Centre. It provides an appropriate bridge between the large Station Gateway scheme and the smaller existing buildings at the west end of Station Way, and positively transforms what is currently a blight on the street scene. Officers agreed that it would provide an appropriate housing mix, whilst the forward planning team agreed that the commercial offering would create footfall and vitality in this edge of centre location. Therefore, it is disappointing that officers have not taken these clear benefits as a foundation on which to work positively with the applicant with a view to optimising the scheme for approval. The applicant remains committed to delivering a quality scheme on this site and hopes that members will take into account in their determination. Thank you for your time. End of statement 1. Statement 2 is by the Councillor for Three Bridges Ward, Councillor Brenda Burgess. I support the officer's suggestion for refusal. I believe that such accommodation will be very small, squashed into such a small area. Problems of congestion could be caused when the refuge is collected due to the position being at a particular busy junction. The occupants could also suffer from excessive fumes from traffic due to the numerous times traffic has to queue whilst waiting at the level crossing and traffic lights. To avoid this, the units would probably need to be sealed. Not a good idea, as during this pandemic it has been found that those living in such accommodation have suffered greatly during lockdown. Apparently, there is no affordable housing provision, yet the flats will be buy to rent, occupied by those on benefits. Why should such people have to live in such poor, substandard accommodation just because they are on benefits? Residents deserve better accommodation than the ones on offer within this scheme. Such an application going forward would diminish the planned Station Gateway scheme. The scheme in this planning application would be poorly aligned, excessively narrow and awkward. The scheme lacks visual interest and looks to be of poor quality. A standalone, isolated building such as this is not the way to develop this type of site. Besides, no design and access statement has been provided, which I believe is a legal requirement. Finally, there is no construction management plan showing how this site could be developed. Plus, there is a danger that any proposal already outlined for the wider area could be jeopardised. Please listen to the officers and refuse this application. Thank you for listening. End of statement 2. Statement 3 is by Councillor for Three Bridges Ward, Councillor Bob Burgess. With reference to planning applications CR 2020-0589 OUT, I wish to support the recommendation for the planning officers to reject the application on the following grounds. 1. Lack of parking provision. 2. Lack of affordable housing. 3. The road outside the proposed development is very busy. And 4. The proposed development would overshadow the existing properties in the vicinity. End of statement 3. That concludes the statements, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Girling. We will now consider the application. Please turn on your camera if you wish to speak.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Hamish for a very comprehensive presentation. I was slightly concerned to hear the applicant's statement because we have a track record in Crawley of being very helpful to applicants and helping applicants to modify proposals to make them suitable to be permitted. But it does seem with this application there is just quite frankly so much wrong with it that it's difficult to conceive how it could be made suitable for approval without significant rework on it. The lack of affordable housing is completely unacceptable, particularly on an application like that with small units that would be ideal for affordable housing in some cases. The highways issues are pretty much insurmountable, I think, and certainly we can't accept those. And I think in total, the officers' reasons for refusal are comprehensive. They're backed up by the local plan, and I will be supporting the officer recommendation to refuse the application.
Councillor Irvine.
Thank you. First of all, the council does have strict guidelines on speaking rights at committees from councillors, and the councillors, I believe, that are entitled to speak at committees are the ward councillor, a councillor from an adjacent ward which would be affected by the development, cabinet members, and county councillors whose ward might be affected. So neither Councillor Lamb's objections have been read out, and he's the ward member, nor have Councillor Flack's objections been read out, and she's the ward member for the adjacent ward which would be affected. But you have read out the objections from two ward councillors who aren't ward members for this particular ward, and whose objections don't relate to anything connected with their ward. So I think there's something a little bit wrong there. If I could just comment further on the application, I must admit, in all my years as a member of this planning commission, which is about 17 or 18 years, I've never heard a stronger statement from an applicant. And unfortunately, I found myself nodding along and agreeing with a lot of what was in that applicant's letter. Because, for example, in the report, there's no mention of a response from the Cycling and Walking Forum, and yet they did provide a response, and that was published on the council's website, but not included in the report. And 5.3, the report says that that the storage would not be suitable. But in fact, the Cycling Walking Forum doesn't have any problem with the proposed storage. And further on, there's mention of a shortfall of 1 or 2 cycling spaces. Well, that's really neither here nor there. That can be sorted out with the applicant. There's no mention of a comment from our own forward planning officer stating that they support the application in economic policy terms. And as regards the Highways Authority, I quote from their letter, which they sent to the council in response to this: they do not consider that highway safety will be detrimentally affected through the proposal and car parking provisions, and consider that the car-free development in this accessible location meets the NPPF presumption in favour of sustainable development. In addition, about 8 or 9 years ago, we gave planning permission for a car-free development right opposite this site, a Bastable House. And that was, I believe, a departure from the local plan, and we actually had to go and debate it at the full council meeting to decide what we were going to do. And as I remember rightly, at that time, the council had a conservative majority, and only one council against it. Secondly, at 5.25, the local authority has confirmed it objects to the current layout proposed. That's what the report says. But in actual fact, if you read the letter from the local highway authority, it doesn't actually object. It gives advice as to what should happen in future. So I agree that there's probably quite a few things wrong with this proposal, not the least of which is the lack of affordable housing and probably the scale and massing of the site. But I think that the applicant is right that some of the reasons for refusal are excessive. I can only think that they're there because it's to protect the Aurora development next door, which has only got outline planning permission and might never ever be built. And I'm interested in fairness and balance, and I don't think that this report and these recommendations are very fair or very balanced. Thank you.
Councillor Irvine, can I please address for a moment the 2 points that you made at the beginning of your comments, most of which were for the planning officer, about statements and speaking. The statements or objections from Councillor Lamb and Councillor Flack were made in the period when the application was out for consultation at the end of last year, and their statements of objections are included within the officers' reports. They chose not to make any further statements in advance of this meeting, which is why there was nothing to read out from either of those individuals. Secondly, as to the ward location of this development, following the Boundary Commission changes which came in May 2019, this site does fall within the Three Bridges ward, which is represented by myself, Brenda Burgess and Councillor Bob Burgess. So for those individuals as the ward councillors to make statements, to send them in the appropriate timeline to the Democratic Services Officer so that they could be read out at this meeting is perfectly correct. The balance of your points are very much for Hamish. Thank you.
In that case, Chair, may I apologise for saying that the Three Bridges councillors weren't entitled to make representation. I was going by the location printed on the agenda item, which states Station Way, Northgate, Crawley. So anyway, thank you.
Certainly, Councillor Irvine, apology accepted.
Okay, Councillor Jaggard.
Thank you. Just a couple of comments, really. I hadn't seen the picture of that blank wall on the east elevation, and I think that is a really poor design feature. A brick wall that is 6 stories high is just not acceptable. My other main concern about this proposed development is the ground floor accommodation, where you've got basically windows opening presumably over the footpath, because it's right on the very edge of the footpath. So any windows opening presumably would open over the footpath. Also the lack of light in the higher ones, but on the south elevation, presumably again the windows that will be opening over the amenity space for the next door development, and again opening windows over somebody else's property I didn't think was allowed anyway. So I mean I've got huge concerns about this, but I just want to clarify about opening windows on that ground floor. Thank you.
If there are no further questions, we will go back to the planning officer, Mr. Walker, if you please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, there's been a few issues raised there. If I can just start by addressing some of the comments that the applicant's agent has made in his statement, because I think they are pertinent to how we have dealt with the application. As he said, pre-application advice was offered on this site. It was a detailed piece of advice, and the scheme that was proposed was similar. We raised very significant concerns in that advice, and as far as I and other officers who've looked at the scheme and obviously considered my report felt, the significant concerns that we raised have in no way been addressed through this application. In terms of affordable housing, that is addressed in paragraph 5.44. The applicant has submitted a viability statement, and in fact that statement suggests that some element of affordable housing could be incorporated within the scheme, but then goes on to conclude that they won't offer any affordable housing. So I think our view is that our position is completely justified, and you'll see in paragraph 5.44 the Housing Enabling and Development Manager's comments. As well as feeling that the scheme is unacceptable in affordable housing terms, he doesn't agree with a number of the figures, such as build costs, that have been incorporated into the applicant's viability work. So we have significant concerns about that. The local highway authority have objected and do object to the scheme. He's quite right, and I think Councillor Irvine mentioned this as well. They did make comments stating that they were happy with car-free development. And as I said in my presentation, as it says in the report, in theory, I think we would be happy with a car-free development in a town centre location like this. My concern, and the local highway authority's concern, is that you simply cannot operate the loading bay with a vehicle in it and still have pedestrians happily passing that, or have sufficient width for pedestrians, people with buggies, people in wheelchairs to pass, and particularly at any time when the refuse store doors are open. Turning to Councillor Irvine's other comments, yes, it does appear that the cycling and walking forum have been missed off the report. I apologise for that. They did comment on the application, and they should have been included in there. I think, as Councillor Irvine said, there is cycle parking within the scheme, and I think with a bit of tweaking that could well be made acceptable. But I think the wider highway objections do still stand. The forward planning comments, though, are addressed. They are set out in the report. The opening section states that comments were received, and then paragraph 5.3 highlights some of those and addresses those. So it's not the uses that we are objecting to. And then in terms of the windows, if I can just go back to the presentation, I don't know whether they're proposing sliding windows, which would obviously address or could address the opening over the footpath or over the amenity space to the south. But unfortunately, from the details that I've got there, it is very difficult to tell. They certainly don't have the appearance really of sliding windows, certainly not kind of sash type windows. It may be that you've got on the ground floor there, that you've got top vents that would open and the lower half wouldn't open, which would appear then perhaps to be above head height. So that may address the potential for, for hitting pedestrians or causing an obstruction. It probably adds to concerns about the residential amenity levels within those rooms if the only window that you can open is at a very high level. So I think that probably answers. The same thing would apply on the amenity space as such. So I think that probably answers the questions, but obviously come back to me if there's anything I've missed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Walk. If members have further comments or questions, would they please turn their cameras on? Councillor Irvine.
Thank you. One of my main concerns is that this is a town centre site. It's a brownfield site. I mean, at the moment, the best you can say about it is it's a car park. At worst, it's a piece of derelict land, and it would be good to see something built on it. But this might not necessarily be the right development. However, what concerns me is that by burying this, coming up with so many different objections to this proposal, some of which are a little bit moot, does that mean that in effect we're saying that nothing can ever be built on this site in the future? That's it, and that no car-free development can be considered? Are we setting a precedent, a planning history to refer to in the future if someone proposes something else? Otherwise, we're just going to have a site in the town centre standing derelict.
I can't see anybody else. Mr. Walk, would you respond to that, please?
Yes, thank you. I don't think we're saying that at all, really. I think what we are saying is that we have a series of very significant concerns about the scheme. As Councillor Smith mentioned, it's certainly our practice that we will negotiate and try and improve schemes where we can. And in fact, this may well be the first scheme since I started at Crawley that we haven't done that on, simply because it is such a poor scheme. I think there are so many issues to be addressed. The scheme would need to be significantly revised and substantially reduced in scale to, I think, in planning officers' view, to become anywhere near acceptable. So we're not saying that we want the site to remain derelict. It may be that some form of development is acceptable, but we do have significant concerns about the residential environment. We have significant concerns about the size and scale of the building that's proposed, the highway issues and all the other things set out in the report. And I think the changes that would be required would be so substantial that they would need to be done through a new planning application. And that really is why we have not entered into negotiations with the applicant and we've moved straight to a recommendation for refusal. Partly also because these issues have all been raised with them at pre-application stage and, as I said, have not been addressed. So, you know, yes, if future applications come in, they can be considered on their own merits. This isn't necessarily going to sterilise the site, but I think we do need a significant rethink by the applicant before we could consider anything more favourably on the site.
Thank you very much, Mr. Walk. I'm very pleased to hear you say that because I would agree with Councillor Irvine that the site is not well used at the moment, and that some sensible and appropriate development here would, I believe, be of benefit to the town. I don't normally make a comment as chair, but I will in this context. I don't feel that this scheme is that development. Any other questions or issues to be raised by members of the committee? I can't see any cameras going on. The recommendation is to refuse, and in doing so that includes the additional heritage recommendation to refuse put up at the beginning of the meeting. So I will formally move the recommendation to refuse. Could I please ask for someone to say? Already see Councillor Smith with his camera on. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I second the motion to accept the officer recommendation and refuse this application for the reasons outlined in the report.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Will the Democratic Services Officer please conduct the recorded vote?
Councillor Ashcroft.
Agree to refuse.
Councillor Belbin.
For the recommendation.
Councillor Irvine.
Abstain.
Councillor Jaggard.
I'm for the recommendation.
Councillor Mughali.
For the recommendation.
Councillor Purdy.
For the recommendation.
Councillor Rana, could you please turn your camera on?
Thank you, Ms. Actually, I'm very pleased to refuse this application because we've got too many of these kind of hideous buildings in the town anyway. Thank you.
And Councillor Smith.
For the recommendation.
So the vote has been taken with 7 votes for the recommendation, 0 votes against and 1 abstention.
Thank you. Application CR 2020-0589 outline, car park, Station Way, Northgate, Crawley, has been refused for the reasons set out in report PES 358B, including the additional recommendation noted, sorry, including additional reason noted this evening. Thank you. We will now move on to agenda item 7. Application CR 2020-0592 full, Northside, Balcombe Road, Pound Hill, Crawley. Would the development manager please introduce the report? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a few updates, first of all, to run through on this report. As you'll have spotted, having read the agenda, we had a couple of comments outstanding when the report was drafted, and we've received those comments now. So the first comment was from the Sustainability Officer, who has raised no objection to the application, but recommended some conditions. And the second comment that was received back was the ecological consultant, and the ecologist has commented that the application was not supported by any reptile survey or any assessment, despite this being identified as potential habitat in the preliminary ecological appraisal, which was supplied with the application. He commented that in the absence of the survey, the presence of reptiles can't be ruled out, and the ecological evidence is therefore incomplete. He also comments furthermore that the layout does not retain or propose a suitable compensatory habitat for reptiles, and it's noted that there is a lack of green space and space for wildlife to encourage biodiversity within the layout shown. So he's recommending a refusal reason on ecology grounds, and that's what you will see on the screen before you. So it would be an additional refusal reason, number 8, which captures the comments I've just outlined there. So an additional reason on inadequate evidence that the proposal can't demonstrate a positive contribution to biodiversity, contrary to local plan policy ENV2 and paragraph 175 of the NPPF. There are also a couple of further corrections to the report. In paragraph 1.5, it says that the TPO trees run along the western boundary of the site, where in actual fact they run both along the east and west boundaries, and I'll point those out on the plans that I'm going to show you in a moment. There are also 2 small changes to the refusal reasons 1 and 2 as printed. In refusal reason 1, there's a typing error, and GD1 should read SD1. And policy CH2 should be listed as an additional policy in the refusal reason. And in refusal reason 2, policy CH3 should be added to the refusal reason. So turning now to the plans. Okay, the application site is edged in red on the plan before you now. The site is on the eastern side of Balcombe Road. It's an elongated site, and you'll see there's an area to the top which is also owned by the applicant, edged in blue. That's the subject of a different application that's not being considered this evening. The site is about 1/2 hectare in size. And there are trees lining the Balcombe Road along the east side, and also a row of trees which form a boundary. Sorry, that's Balcombe Road to the west side of the site, and a row of trees that form a landscape boundary to properties to the east, which are in the newly constructed part of Forge Wood. The property, the site is partially developed in the sense that there's at the end there is Northside, just outside the site is Northside House, but then you've got the florist and the car wash area in the southern part of the site, and then there's a sort of landscape bund through the middle, and then a more sort of overgrown scrubland type area along with a mixture of trees in the northern portion here. The trees along the west side are part of an area of structural landscaping which is identified in the Crawley local plan, and that extends along both sides of the Balcombe Road. I'll just show you some photographs of the site, give you a better idea of what it looks like. So the photograph in the centre of the screen now is a photograph looking due east across the site. You'll see there's a tree screen. This is taken in the winter. It's not as substantial as it appears in the summer. And then behind that are the houses in Daffodil Crescent. You'll see on the right hand side you've got a photograph from within the site showing the tree screen, the other wooded tree screen along the back of the houses in Daffodil Crescent. A couple more photographs from within the site. So this sort of shows the hard stand area. There's a sort of car wash and a florist, I say, at the southern end. So and it's a little bit untidy and overgrown. And again, there's another photograph sort of showing the corner, and this is the eastern boundary of the site. There's a slight drop in levels between the houses in the Forge Wood development and the application site. Probably just easier to rotate the view round so it's still facing north. So this is the proposed layout. Just zoom in on it. Okay, so the application proposed is for 14 dwellings. The site is laid out as 4 rows of terraced properties, orientated north-south on the plots. So there are 2 points of access onto the Balcombe Road, here and here, and the dwellings or the blocks of the terraces are laid out facing each other, with parking to the front of the houses in a sort of shared parking area. So the parking's to the front of the dwellings in kind of combined car parks. So you've got a similar layout for both the houses, the access to the north and to the south. And again, you can see the trees a bit more clearly along the east and west boundaries there. So surface car parking is proposed to serve these dwellings. And if I can just enlarge that slightly. In terms of refuse collection and storage, there's a sort of bin area proposed in front of the dwellings nearest the road, the westernmost dwellings, to surface to collect the bins. And I say the accesses are just from these. One is an existing access and one is a new access onto the Balcombe Road. If we look at some of the elevations, the designs of the houses. So this is one of the blocks of 2-bedroom terraced houses. So fairly plain designs and obviously very uniform. So simply detailed with sort of fully hipped roofs. So that's a typical example of the 2-storey houses. Oops, I'll put the same one up twice. The palette is very similar. There, one or two of the blocks are proposed in these sort of grey and buff tiles, and the others are sort of in a red brick with a grey tile. But they all have a sort of similar architectural approach. And in terms of the floor plans, this is the 2-bed unit. So yeah, designed with sort of north and south facing aspects. This is a 2-bed person unit. So the bathroom in the middle and a through lounge dining room arrangement at the bottom. And this is one of the 3-bed units. Just to show the slight difference, a slightly bigger footprint, 2 rooms at the back, double room at the front with an ensuite, a bathroom in the middle, and another open plan layout at the bottom. So as you'll see from the officer's report, there's an extensive planning history for this site. For the residential, for sort of options for residential development. Most of the recent applications for residential development on this site have been refused under delegated authority, as they weren't classed as major planning applications. They were under 10 units. And as you'll see, the concerns primarily focused around the scale and form of the development, the impact on trees and landscaping, the cramped form of development and the noise environment. And you'll see as I go through the report that some of the concerns raised by consultees stem from the reliance on older documents submitted with these earlier applications. You'll see that the respect of the policies, they're all listed in detail in the report. So if we take the concerns of officers in turn, I'll start with the visual impact. And just to get this plan the right way around, it's going to be easier. Let's turn it back north so we're all facing the right direction. So as I've said before, this site is partially developed, and the bottom part of the site is particularly accepted. I think it's particularly untidy, and you know, would benefit from potentially being redeveloped and tidied up. But I think in principle we would support some sort of residential here. Indeed, it's sort of part of the wider policy H2 allocation for Forge Wood. But there are particular concerns with this scheme in terms of the erosion of the landscaping on both the east and west sides of the site, and the proximity of the units to the trees. These are protected trees. These are all subject to a tree preservation order. I think there's 13 on one side and 7 on the other, but they're all, you know, important trees. But if you look at say plot 11 here, you can see that the distance between the trees and the dwelling is incredibly close, and as I say, there is a conflict there. The dwellings also are very close to the road, Balcombe Road, which is obviously a busy road, and also due to their proximity in that location, are going to be very visually prominent, particularly in the winter when the tree cover's gone. There's also concern that the plots and the orientation of the plots north-south side onto the Balcombe Road is not really characteristic with the pattern of development and form of development along the Balcombe Road, where generally properties have front gardens and face forwards onto the road. So again, there's a character concern here. And also that similarly having them facing forward, you then allow a more landscape frontage to the road. Officers consider that the wooded character along this stretch of road is important, and I say it is allocated or identified as structural landscaping. And it's also worth noting in the officer report that the designer at Forge Wood has also tried to respect the landscape character of Balcombe Road, and there are other appeal decisions referred to in the officer report where this sort of woodland character has also been highlighted, and appeals have been dismissed. In terms of the adequacy of the dwellings for the future occupiers, you'll see from the officers' report, these are generally considered to be in line with the space standards internally. And in terms of the garden sizes, they, on the face of things, meet the requirements for garden sizes externally. However, officers do have concerns about the usability of some of these gardens, given the proximity to the protected trees. And the potential pressure going forward from future occupiers for works to these trees to improve light and daylight and stop sort of overhanging branches and debris coming into the gardens. So this is a concern in relation to the proximity of the plots. I think plot 1 was mentioned, but certainly the end plots closest to the landscaping. The other concern with this scheme is in respect of noise. And as you see, we've got the Balcombe Road, which is obviously a busy road anyway, and it's getting busier with the Forge Wood scheme. The comments from the Environmental Health Department are in the report, but you'll see that they've questioned the report that's been provided by the applicants, and they're very concerned that the dwellings nearest to the road would be subject to unacceptable levels of noise, and that the noise mitigation that the applicants were proposing would be inappropriate. So there is a concern overall, and one of the refusal reasons is in relation to the adequacy of the units. They're considered unacceptable for future occupiers in respect of the of both noise and the pressure on some of the gardens that are in close proximity to the trees. So in respect to trees and structural landscaping, as I say, this is an important screen along Balcombe Road. It provides a landscape edge to the site, and it's characteristic with this sort of section of Balcombe Road as you sort of approach and drive through Forge Wood. And while the applicant states that the trees along this edge are to be retained, our tree officer has concern about the proximity of the development to the proposed retained trees. It's also concerned about the additional accesses that are being proposed, or the additional access which is punctuating that tree screen, and concern about the construction and damage to these trees during the construction process, and the proximity to the hard standing and paving that is shown close and within the root protection areas. So that overall there are concerns that the development would compromise the health and amenity of the trees in the longer term, and the tight layout he considers doesn't allow sufficient space for the trees to grow to maturity. In terms of highway safety, while the overall parking and cycling provision is considered adequate, there is concern that there is insufficient space within the site to allow a larger service vehicle to turn and rejoin the highway in forward gear. So obviously they've provided the bin collection areas underneath the canopies of the trees at the end of each row of parking, but it isn't clear, or there isn't anything to demonstrate that a bin lorry could even turn into the site to collect the bins safely, or whether they would have to stay on the Balcombe Road. And you'll also see that the County Council, the Highway Authority, are concerned the safety data provided by the applicants is not up to date. There are concerns about the development and the impact for access and manoeuvring on highway safety. So there's an outstanding issue there. In respect of infrastructure and affordable housing, the requirements are listed in the officer's report, but these haven't been discussed with the applicant given the other concerns with the development. And there is no Section 106 agreement in place to secure the required affordable housing and other contributions. So in conclusion, while the principle of some development here could be acceptable, the development as designed would have an adverse effect on the character and appearance of the street scene, including the trees and structural landscaping, which contribute to the sylvan character of Balcombe Road. The layout and amount of development results in conflicts with the retained trees on the site, which are potentially detrimental to their long-term health. And there is insufficient space for existing trees to thrive or new ones to be established. And the development also fails to provide appropriate ecological mitigation, as the full ecological value of the site hasn't been completely assessed. The site layout results in dwellings which would be subject to unacceptable levels of noise and provides for gardens where daylight and amenity would be compromised by the proximity to the trees. The application has not demonstrated it would be securely accessed and serviced, and the Section 106 contributions have not been secured. So the recommendations for refusal for the 7 reasons set out in the report and the additional ecology reason that I showed you at the beginning of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. McPherson. I can confirm that no statements have been submitted by members of the public on this item. So, committee, we will now begin consideration of the application. Please turn on your camera if you wish to speak.
Councillor Jaggard.
Thank you. It's always me going first. Hi. Yeah. I noticed from the photographs that, you know, the untidy site, and just because somewhere is untidy and left to fall into untidiness by the owners doesn't mean to say that we should allow poor quality development. And I think that's what this is. It's just so many properties put in. And I'm really concerned about the trees, particularly on page 53 of the report at 1.6, and it said in the summer of 2014, unauthorised felling of 6 individual oak trees took place, and action was taken. Now it seems to me that maybe the owners of the site thought they could chop down those 6 trees and then submit an application now saying that there aren't that many trees, they're just along the border, along the edges. And although this enforcement took place on this site, they haven't actually complied with the order to replant trees. So it is really upsetting for me that mature oak trees are being cut down to make it look as though there weren't that many trees on the site. And if you look on the Google map of the site, there are a lot of trees within the site there that will need to be removed to have any sort of development, really. And I do find that particularly disappointing. I also, with the way that the vehicle access is along that Balcombe Road, it is so busy along there. I used to commute along that road to Crawley in the mornings, and it's a nightmare along there with those additional driveways. On the report at 2.3, it says that there are 3 additional driveways. 2 new accesses are proposed in addition to the retention of the existing access. I'm assuming that is referring to the one that's in blue as well as the 2 red ones, so I'd just like that confirmed. But as I say, I do have great reservations about this overdevelopment of this site. Thank you.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I broadly agree with the majority of Councillor Jaggard's comments, particularly concerned about the lack of agreement on affordable housing, either provision of it or contribution to it. It's a key policy issue for this council to provide affordable housing for Crawley people, and this application needs to play its part in that. It does look as if the layout is really crammed in a similar way to the previous one, where one can't help but wonder that the objective is to stuff as many houses in there as possible, with little consideration for the Crawley people that are going to live in them. And I think personally that Crawley people do deserve better than that. The new town was built with much better standards of housing, much of it terraced, but it had space for people, decent sized rooms, etc. And I think this should be able to do that as well. I know the room sizes do comply with policy. I also concur regarding the access to the road. I think that is really not good enough, and it's not going to work like that. One of the major things that we get as councillors with casework is people wanting trees cut back or chopped down because they're too close to their properties. And in fact, this application starts off by proposing to build houses that go right up adjacent to trees. It's not a good idea. We know that. I think this application has got too much stuck into it, and I agree with the officer recommendation to refuse, and I'll be supporting it reluctantly.
Thank you very much. I can't see any of the cameras on, so I'll get my questions in if I might. As an observation, the road layout, this site actually sits between two sets of traffic lights along the Balcombe Road for the new Steers Lane junction and access into Forge Wood. So turning in and out is not as difficult as it might first appear, or perhaps was some years ago. However, if you can't turn a dust cart in and out of the cul-de-sacs, then I do think that that's sort of insufficient space. My other observation was around density. I note paragraph 5.8 of the report states that density is similar to that of Forge Wood, which therefore did strike me for the proposed refusal reason 8, with the comment that inadequate green space is perhaps inappropriate. Having said that, I'd agree with the previous commentators that given the site's location directly up against the Balcombe Road and given its proximity to the preserved trees, it is too dense. Thank you. Mrs. McPherson, would you care to come back?
Thank you. I think there was really just what I picked out, just one query that needed a sort of specific response, and that was in relation to the number of accesses. Councillor Jaggad is absolutely right. There is one new access proposed in this red line area, but I think the reports inadvertently referred to the blue land as well, which is where the second access is. So there's one new access in this red edge site. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any further questions or comments? Please turn your camera on. I can't see any cameras going on, so all members having had an opportunity to speak, we will move on to the vote. The recommendation is to refuse for the reasons set out in the report, together with the additional reason proposed this evening. I move the recommendation. Councillor Irvine, I can see you've switched your camera on. I trust that is to second the refusal. Councillor Irvine, you're muted.
I said, Chair, it is to second it, unless someone else wants to second it.
No, thank you very much, Councillor Irvine, for seconding the recommendation to refuse. Will the Democratic Services Officer please conduct the vote?
Okay, so this is a recorded vote being taken on agenda item 7. So this is a recorded vote being taken on agenda item 7. Committee members are asked to vote for or against the recommendation before them, or by way of abstention. Please ensure your video feed is live before declaring your vote. Councillor Ashcroft.
4.
Councillor Belbin.
For the recommendation.
Councillor Irvine.
4.
Councillor Jaggard.
4.
Councillor Mughali.
For the recommendation.
Councillor Purdy.
For the recommendation.
Councillor Rana.
For the recommendation.
And Councillor Smith.
For the recommendation.
Okay, so the vote has been taken with 8 votes for the recommendation, 0 votes against and 0 abstentions on the recommendation.
Thank you. Application number CR 2020 0592 full, Northside, Balcombe Road, Pound Hill, Crawley, has been refused for the reasons set out in report PES 358C, together with the additional reason proposed and agreed this evening. Thank you. We will move on to agenda item 8, application CR 2020 0591 tree preservation order, Milton Mount Lake, Pound Hill, Crawley. Can I please ask the development manager to introduce the report? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this application is for works to 3 oak trees within Milton Mount Park. This slide shows one of the oak trees located to the rear of 126 to 128 Grattons Drive. The tree is suffering, as an oak tree, suffering dieback, and as you can see has a large wound on one of its major limbs, which is overhanging the footpath. The tree is considered to have limited useful life expectancy, and it's considered by the tree officer to be recommended for removal for safety reasons. The other 2 oak trees are subject to this application are actually next to each other, but for some reason we got plans with them on different slides, so they're side by side, again to the rear of 156 and 154 Grattons Drive. So just in terms of what they look like, the left tree on the left in the foreground, which is this one, the proposal is for crown thin, and the one on behind, which is 9306, which is also shown on the right hand side, is proposed for felling. So again, the tree for felling is considered to have limited life expectancy and declining amenity value, and as you can see from the photograph, the crown is much sparser than its more healthy neighbour. Again, the officer recommendation is to fell 93106 and for surgery, agree the surgery for the 9305, and also to plant 2 replacement oak trees in the next planting season once the 2 mature oaks have been removed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. McPherson. I can confirm there have been no statements submitted by members of the public, so we will move on to discussing this item. If you would like to speak, please turn on your camera. I can't see any cameras coming on, giving you a moment. No one seems to be needing to speak, so therefore we will move to the recommendation. The recommendation is to consent, and I move the recommendation. Would a member of the committee please turn on their camera and second the recommendation? Councillor Smith.
I second the recommendation, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Smith. Will the Democratic Services Officer please record the vote? Please call the vote. Thank you.
So this is a recorded vote being taken on agenda item 8. Committee members are asked to vote for or against the recommendation before them or by way of abstention. Please ensure your video feed is live before declaring your vote. Councillor Ashcroft.
4.
Councillor Belbin.
4.
Councillor Irvine, could you please turn your camera on?
Oh, it turned itself off again. Yes, 4.
Councillor Jaggard.
4.
Councillor Magale.
4.
Councillor Purdy.
4.
Councillor Rana.
4.
Councillor Smith.
For the recommendation.
So the vote has been taken with 8 votes for, 0 votes against and 0 abstentions on the recommendation.
Thank you very much. Application CR 2020 0591 Tree Preservation Order, Milton Mount Lake, Pound Hill, Crawley, has been consented, subject to the conditions set out in report PES 358D. Agenda item 9. Application CR 2020 0653, a tree preservation order, a Milton Mount Lake, Grattons Drive, Pound Hill, Crawley. And yes, that is adjacent to the application that we've just had. Can I please ask the development manager to introduce the report? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, as pointed out, this is another application for works to trees, various trees along the western side of Milton Mount Lake. They're just to highlight some of the key groupings on this plan. The maples referred to in the report are in this area here, behind 118 Grattons Drive. We've got various overhanging trees and alders here, and a birch and a yew further down. There's a group of oak trees which are close to the western entrance of Grattons Drive. So those are the key areas, and the works are proposed by the applicants in the interests of tree management. So if I just show you the different groups of trees on the photograph. So these are the 7 maples that are referred to in the report, and they're proposed to fell the trees. While they're large trees, as you'll see from the photographs, they are in poor condition. They're quite overextended and the roots are rather unstable. You'll also see there's quite a lot of dieback and damage within the crowns of the trees. So the recommendation is that they should be removed and replanted. The other works round by the oaks, which are on the western side near the entrance to Grattons Drive, these are needing crown lifting, which is where you take the lower branches off, and a reduction mainly to the western side limbs, which are the ones sort of facing and overhanging the road. Again, those trees are shown in those 2 photographs, but that limited level of work is considered acceptable and not harmful to their amenity. We've then got some works along the backs of the boundaries of the houses in Grattons Drive. So I've got a picture of the alder on the left-hand side and the yew on the right. And the main reason that is again crown lifting, which is where you take the lower branches off, and some reduction of the overhanging branches. As you can see, they're encroaching quite a long way over into the neighbouring gardens of the nearby properties. So again, those are considered to be acceptable works in terms of visual amenity and sound arboricultural reasons for consenting them. And finally, there's some hazel, quite a lot of hazel stems and stalks within the woodland area, and these are recommended for coppicing, which is the clumps are recommended for coppicing, which is the kind of best practice for this type of species. The recommendation is that the consent be granted for the works described in the report, and subject to a condition requiring the 7 maple trees to be replanted. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. McPherson. We have received no statements from members of the public, so we will move on to considering this item. If you would like to speak, please turn on your camera. Once again, I can't see any cameras going on, so we will move on to the recommendation. The recommendation is to consent, and I move the recommendation. Councillor Peter Smith, would you please second the recommendation?
I second the recommendation, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Smith. Would the Democratic Services Officer please call the vote?
So this is a recorded vote being taken on agenda item 9. Committee members are asked to vote for or against the recommendation before them or by way of abstention. Please ensure your video feed is live before declaring your vote. Councillor Ashcroft.
For.
Councillor Belbin.
For.
Councillor Irvine.
For.
Councillor Jaggard.
For.
Councillor Morgale.
For.
Councillor Purdy.
For.
Councillor Rana.
For.
Councillor Smith.
For.
Thank you. So the vote has been taken with 8 votes for, 0 votes against and 0 abstentions on the recommendation.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Matthews. Application CR 2020 0653, a tree preservation order, Milton Mount Lake, Grattons Drive, Pound Hill, Crawley, has been consented, subject to the conditions set out in report PES 358E. That moves us on to agenda item 10, the supplemental agenda. I am pleased to say that we have no supplemental agenda items for this evening. Therefore, with the business of the planning committee concluded, this meeting is closed at 21:08 hours. May I wish everybody a very good evening. Thank you.